Up if anybody would like, any additional people would like to sign up. There's a speaker request form, but first I'll call up Diane Crocker, and just want her to sit up here in this chair over here.
Yes, that would be great.
And as you get prepared, I'll just go ahead and read this, which I read before each meeting before public comments. This time is intended for individuals to speak and for council to listen. Members of the council will not discuss topics or make decisions during this time, but may take comments or requests under advisement, assign topics to a future council or standing committee agenda, or request staff to take action. Comments about a topic scheduled for a public hearing should be given during the public hearing, not during visitors' comments. Testimony time is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. A 30-second warning will be provided. Speakers should provide their name and city of residence. Providing the council with a written copy of your comments prior to or during the meeting is always appreciated. Those who attend public meetings are required to adhere to the council's rules and proceedings and observe the same standards of decorum as members of the council. Further, at the discretion of the presiding officer, members of the public who fail to observe these rules of procedure will be asked to discontinue speaking, will not be allowed to speak for the remainder of the meeting. That, welcome, Ms. Crocker. Appreciate you being here. You can go ahead and get started.
I brought my comments all typed up. My husband will follow up because I can't get it all in 3 minutes.
Perfect.
I'm going to talk fast. Please bear with me. All right, here we go. My name is Diane Crocker, and I've been in Philomath for 41 years. I've taught thousands of Philomath residents over the years and have taught 2 and 3 generations of many, many families. I feel like I've experienced and had experience and a good concept of the values of the people of Philomath. While I do acknowledge that in any city there is a diversity in thoughts and values, I am speaking to the common values found in the vast majority of Philomath and the surrounding areas. These areas and values include our children, family, hard work, and honesty. We support our schools, our fire department, and our police. We have more churches than we have bars. And when all of this is analyzed, one would see that Philomath is not a good candidate to provide dispensaries of psilocybin mushrooms because of the risk and dangers. The definition of dispensary is a place where medicines are prepared and provided. I believe it is an appropriate word. However, the state of Oregon prefers us to use psilocybin services, perhaps because it sounds more professional, but it is not. There is very little professional going on into the sales of psilocybin mushrooms. The official state of Oregon website refers to the person handing out and making decisions on who gets the mushrooms and how much they get, and then supervises them afterwards as a licensed facilitator. That sounds professional, but it is not. The licensed facilitator does not need any college or higher education at all. So that means we will not be having doctors and nurses and medical professions staff these dispensaries. The training programs and curriculum are all being developed as we speak and brand new, so we are not even sure if they work. I am unclear on how rigorous the training will be or how long it will take, because that information is not yet in place. I am concerned that it will not be rigorous or complete in scope. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the food handler's license that takes less than an hour online to receive. I'm afraid that these licensed facilitators may just be a few steps above that, but with the word license, it sounds responsible. The United States government, under the Controlled Substances Act, states that psilocybin is classified as a Schedule I drug, which means that it has a high potential for misuse and has no currently accepted medical use in treatment in the United States. Oregon is trying to be a test case, and I do not believe that Philomath should be involved.
30 seconds.
I want to see a photo of the people on this topic, but I would only like to see option 3, a total ban on the ballot. There are too many unknowns and unsafe options for number 1 to be considered, or number 2 that automatically goes into effect in 2 years. With option 3, the total ban we have control of is legally coming in. We have control of what is legally coming into our community. And if psilocybin is found to be a wonderful cure, we can always vote to repeal number 3 and instate its legal distribution.
Thank you.
That's all I could get in. Thank you.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. And next we have Mr. Mike Crocker.
I'm also a retired diploma teacher, 38 years, most of those years teaching political science at the high school. The psilocybin mushroom service program throughout the state of Oregon is being run under the umbrella of the Oregon Health Authority. Psilocybin has been allowed to be prescribed by medical doctors for some time. In medically needed cases would continue to be so. But under the proposed psilocybin services, the big difference is that the medical community is left out. I personally think there may be a need medically for psilocybin mushrooms, but I'd much prefer it to be used under the supervision of a medical professional in a medical setting in the case of bad reaction. Through my research, I have found many concerning facts, such as psilocybin mushroom effects last on the average 6 to 12 hours. The leaflet the state of Oregon has put out suggests the client will stay in the facility to ingest the mushrooms and will be loosely supervised while it takes effect. This means most people will need to be there for at least 6 hours. I sort of find it hard to believe anyone would stick around for the 12 hours some people need, maybe not even 1 hour. What keeps them from leaving early and being out on the road driving a vehicle under the influence? The doses of mushrooms vary greatly based on first the concentrate of psilocybin in the mushroom, whether they use only natural or include synthetic psilocybin. Add to the variables that affect efficacy, age, liver, and kidney function, and how much food and water in the client's system, and also a person's BMI. Receiving psilocybin mushrooms under this new program does not require prescription in Oregon or any other contact with the medical professional. A person that has some underlying conditions or mental diagnoses can find these mushrooms dangerous. Even some clients without these diagnoses will experience a bad trip. They can involve, among others, extreme paranoia, extreme and sudden mood swings, impaired judgment, and negative hallucinations. Some may become aggressive. Some will need to call 911 or go to the hospital. Combining psilocybin with other drugs such as alcohol, cannabis, or amphetamines elevates the risk. The NIH and Johns Hopkins School of Medicine put out 2 reports that cited a study that suggests up to 10% of psilocybin users have caused harm to themselves or others. Our police and EMTs will have to deal with these problems, and I personally think they have enough to deal with. It's not something I want cultivated in our town. There are still many unknowns about how Oregon is going to regulate and ensure relative safety in the sale of mushrooms.
30 seconds.
They have until December 31st, 2022 to put things in place. I would really want to see option 3 on the ballot for the people of Oregon, people of Philomath to vote on. Direct democracy is always a better way to go than indirect democracy. And direct democracy is really great for a small population. Indirect democracy fits well for a state or a country, but for a community our size, direct democracy is the way to go. And I'd like to see option 3 on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. So having no further, any additional public comment? Nobody's wanting to give comment online, right?
And you've received handouts from everyone that submitted written testimony today or prior to today.
Okay, thank you for that. And so with that, we first will then move on to the discussion of the psilocybin ban. And Catherine, City Attorney, Deputy City.
Yep, I'm here remote.
Yeah. Would you like to introduce this topic?
Sure. So the last council meeting of the city attorney's office brought forward the fact that in order to potentially put a ban on the Philomath ordinances, we would need to put an ordinance before the voters before the deadline to get issues put on the November ballot. That's coming up, I believe, in the next month or so. You requested that we come back with a proposed ballot title and ordinance, one that would institute a 2-year ban, and then another that would institute a permanent ban. The ballot language between the title, explanatory statement, and all that is a little bit different between the temporary ban and the permanent ban. and the ordinance language is also just a little bit different, but mostly the same, other than that the temporary ban puts in automatic sunset, whereas the permanent ban says there's a permanent ban. So that's all I have right now. If anyone has any specific questions about how they're constructed or the like, I've included a memo about how state laws require that ballot titles and such be constructed. Everything should basically be in the memo, and I can answer specific questions.
And Ms. Pratt, can you just talk about why it is that the city or the council cannot vote or is not going to vote on whether or not to institute this ban? It's going to the voters. And can you just talk to that a little bit just for the public?
Right. So when Measure 109 was put on the 2000 general election ballot, it was a statewide question asking whether the citizens of Oregon wanted to allow psilocybin consumption and manufacturing, production, all of that under very specific circumstances. There had been a huge 100-page thing that had come out with Measure 109, just kind of explaining what it was going to look like, what the research was that was backing that up. That ballot measure passed by a majority of the state. However, because the state had been learning from its last legalization of marijuana, it decided to allow similar carve-outs as it did for marijuana, meaning that the local jurisdictions, so cities and counties, could refer the question to the voters as to whether the local voters wanted this Measure 109 bill to take effect within their local jurisdiction. And specifically, the state allowed for either a permanent ban or the option of a 2-year temporary moratorium. That moratorium being for the fact that, as was described in community comments, OHA has not completed their rulemaking. They will not be complete until December. That was the deadline given in the Measure 109 ballot. That was all laid out. That's why it was a 100+ page explanatory thing about it. And because of that, the state understands that jurisdictions might be wary. It is easier to temporarily ban something than to permanently ban something and then undo that, as they've learned. And so that's why they gave the option where there would be an automatic sunset after 2 years. And the reason 2 years is the picked date is because this particular ban or removal of ban can only be placed on general election ballots, so elections in even years.
And then we had specifically asked the idea of whether or not we could do a ranked choice vote as well. And can you just describe why that did not come before us?
So that could not come before you because the way that ranked choice voting goes is that each choice has to be an affirmative, meaning that the question would be, would you want a permanent ban? Would you want a temporary ban? Would you want no ban? But because of the way that the question of would you want no ban is phrased, it's kind of a double negative. It defeats or doesn't defeat, it violates essentially the type of way that ballot questions must be phrased for the Oregon voters. So even though Benton County is set up to do ranked choice voting, the way that the language would work out, it just wasn't really a feasible option.
Thank you. And Chris?
I just want to add in one of the other questions that came up at the last meeting was what direction Corvallis was headed. We don't operate in a vacuum. I did speak with Jim Brewer, who also serves as attorney for City of Corvallis, and Catherine can double me on this, but he indicated that Corvallis is not considering any ban, either a 2-year moratorium or a permanent ban. So they're not taking any action as a council, which means, I guess you could derive from that these types of centers will be able to be established in the city of Corvallis, which is, again, a couple miles away. So as far as having access, Philomath residents having access to these types of centers, again, they would have that type of access in neighboring Corvallis.
That's correct, except the caveat being that we can't know exactly how it's going to play out, because just as Philomath has the option under the state law, Corvallis would have the option to institute time, place, manner restrictions I can't speak to what those would look like right now, in the same way I can't speak to how Philomath would try to introduce any if they chose so.
Thank you very much. Councilor Biscoe.
Thank you, Council Pruitt, or Pratt, excuse me. We talked, just to clarify, we talked at the last meeting about we would have multiple options on, and I think that was the ranked choice conversation. And I just want to make sure I understand correctly and clearly. So where we are at with these recommendations is we will either be, it's a yes or no vote is what's going to occur, right? It's not a multiple choice. We're not giving any option outside of what these options might be, which is a 2-year moratorium in effect or a full ban is kind of where we're landing. Is that correct? So there won't be, it sounded like there could be like 3 choices the way we were talking about it at the last work session.
Right. Jim and I went and did some research to see if that was going to be a viable option. It's just not going to be based on how the state election laws are written in terms of how a ballot title must look and how ranked choice voting would look. It's if it were an option of like a 1-year ban, so we couldn't, we wouldn't be able to allow it, or that wasn't an option, but we had 3 options of a 1-year, a 2-year, or a permanent ban. That could be a ranked choice vote, but because we have the option of doing nothing, it kind of eliminates the ability to do a ranked choice vote, because every vote, the affirmative needs to be, yes, I want that. And with the double negative, it just wouldn't work.
And then to be clear, the vote has to go, whether it's a moratorium vote or an outright ban, it has to go to the voters, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
And the option cannot be for a 2-year moratorium or for a ban. It must include the no ban option, correct?
So today City Council will either vote that the total ban go, or the 2-year ban, or no ban. We are only going to be able to have one of those 3 outcomes.
Thank you.
The 2-year ban can be renewed after 2 years. It can basically the same ballot title will be sent off to the electors again to extend out that sunset timeline. But that's kind of the 3 choices that we have, though.
Thank you. So Kazi.
In the event the total ban is on the ballot and it's defeated, what would the result be?
The result would be as if we didn't put the ban on the ballot at all. The OHA rules and regulations that will be codified, and then the ORS that's been codified as a result of Measure 109 passing would take effect. That's the same outcome if we put the temporary ban on and it failed. So it doesn't mean that there are no options for the city after that, because the city still has the opportunity to institute time, place, manner restrictions. That opportunity is also available during the time period that the 2-year moratorium or the permanent ban would be in effect. So that way regulations could be passed by the city before the ban is lifted to, if that was an option that they wanted to go down in the future.
Thank you. Councilor Andrade.
First, I wanted to say that Councilor Lehman and then Councilor Lowe had their hands up before me.
That's okay. You go ahead.
Okay. That what you just said, Council Pratt, is very reassuring. I'm definitely leaning towards moratorium. But I also was wondering, I know that the language spoke about manufacturing and service centers, or a combination of them, in the event that there needs to be a compromise of some sort of what kind of which measure to put forward. Do they have to be in the one ballot initiative, the manufacturing and the service, or like?
So that's the catch-all basically to describe any type of licensed entity outside of a laboratory, because it's mostly a citing issue. So laboratories that are included in the licensure scheme, however, they already have to be licensed as, they have to have and maintain the licensure by the state to operate as a regular laboratory. It's mostly the new entities, which are the places where the psilocybin would be produced or manufactured, and then the places where it'd be distributed to the individuals. This ban contemplates banning both of those. However, in theory, I suppose with a time, place, manner restriction, or if you decided to change the zoning portion of the Philomath Municipal Code, you could probably put certain restrictions or change the type of uses to allow one but not the other. And that's kind of what the 2-year ban would allow people to feel out. It gives them more time to look at the actual regulations that come out of the Oregon Health Authority and see how they end up getting instituted in other cities.
Okay, thank you for that. And then just to clarify one of the things you had just said about the 2-year moratorium. So I just want to make sure I heard correctly. After the 2-year moratorium ends, if we want to, we can put that back on the ballot again for another 2-year moratorium, potentially indefinitely until otherwise decided. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. If you look at the ordinance that's attached with the temporary ban, like the very last section of that proposed ordinance of the ordinance has a sunset date effective December 31st, 2024. If we wanted, as far as I understand the rule as the law is written, we can refer it again to the voters. However, to do that, we would need to be having that conversation in the summer of 2024 so that we meet the deadlines for to get it on the ballot.
And it is easier to just keep doing that as opposed to repealing a ban, correct?
So I can't speak to that because I would like to believe that would be the case because of the specific restriction on having the ban need a ballot title sent to the voters versus having a sunset in place. Potentially, it might be easier to let it sunset as opposed to taking it back. But once you have it on there, you can't. I don't believe you would be able to change that. But again, it's all in flux because there's just nothing that's 100% finished at this point.
Thank you.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you so much.
And Councilor Lehman?
Yeah, I had 2 questions. The first is about the time, place, and manner. When we develop the rules about time, place, and manner for the city of Philomath, that does not go to the voters. That's just a council issue. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Okay, and so we could effectively use the time, place, and manner restrictions to ban the use or the implementation of this legislation. Is that correct?
You could, similar to how the city's treated cannabis and dispensaries.
Right. And so if we followed that path, for example, we did the 2-year moratorium, and in that intervening 2 years, we put in time, place, and manner restrictions that effectively bans the implementation of that legislation. If, say, 2 or 3 years later, there was enough evidence that we felt comfortable to repeal some of those time, place, and manner restrictions, that again is just a city council issue. That would not go to the voters. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, please. City Recorder.
There was a question as to how difficult it is to repeal something once it's passed, say, a ban. I would use the general fund fee as an example of something that was simply repealed by a follow-up ordinance.
Right. Thank you. And Councilor Lowe.
So Councilor Lehman essentially stole my question and probably articulated a lot better than I did. So thank you for that. So if we went with the 2-year moratorium and we find out that when the regulations are published, when OHA comes out with things, and we find out that it really is addresses mental health issues as it's intended to do, and we find that there are positive benefits, and moratoriums in place. So after the 2 years, is there a way to then go back to the voters and say we'd like to approve you to approved that this is acceptable subject to their time, place, and manner restrictions.
So that wouldn't be necessary if council voted to send the 2-year moratorium to the voters and the voters approved the 2-year moratorium. The ordinance as I have proposed has the automatic sunset. It'll automatically sunset December 31, meaning that January 1, 2025, it would be legal to have these entities site within the city limits subject to any additional restrictions that the city decides to pass based on either city ordinance or the land zoning or anything similar.
Okay. So then it would be really to the city's benefit and the council's benefit to be very proactive ahead of any sunset of the moratorium to ensure that what's wanted is in place ahead of time.
That's
That
correct.
would have to be on the docket. Okay. Thank you.
And that, I believe that was the goal of the state allowing a 2-year moratorium, because the idea of passing a ban and then repealing it can be unpalatable to some, or perhaps that's what the lesson learned from cannabis was. I'm not 100% sure, but that it was in some way related to the reaction to the rollout of the legalization of cannabis and how cities had treated dispensaries and then a recreational type shop.
Okay, thank you.
And so ballot measure 109 is making, so if we put a total ban before the voters, and I'm just going to point out that measure 109 passed within the city of Philomath, I think by 1/3 of the population. I think I saw reference to a number of approximately 1,400 versus 2,000.
It was 60-40.
60-40, okay.
Yes.
So I think it's just worth thinking about if you want to put a total ban on the ballot, because that's what you think is appropriate, but it doesn't pass. Because past evidence suggests that it's possible that it may not, then you should just be aware that it may fail, and then that's one risk, right, that you face. By putting a 2-year moratorium on it, I think it allows the voters to revisit this. I don't like the idea of putting on another similar ballot measure in 2 years. I really don't like that idea. I think that makes things confusing and people get tired of seeing things come before themselves multiple times. So those are just 2 points that I'm weighing in my head. But I just wanted to share that. And Councilor Nielsen?
Being on the police committee and also doing a substantial amount of research and hearing the input from the Crockers today and other readings, and also the history of measures such as 110, I don't think 2 years is adequate. That legislative regulation is tremendously cumbersome. So we're thinking that we don't even know the legislation on this yet, and saying it's coming in December. If we choose 2 years is obviously based on history of other measures in our state. 2 years is not enough time to know whether this is going to work, whether the legislation proposed is going to be adequate to protect the public and to provide safety and well-being. It's just not long enough. And we can see the ramifications. We're having tremendous ramifications from Measure 110 that we still have not resolved, and it is 2 years later. I think I'm opposed. I'm for the ban. I think we should go for the voters with this ban, with the understanding that we just don't know enough. And in our history of legislative, legislative faux pas that have been throughout and regarding the distribution of what should be considered a medical use, I think we've been negligent in that. And so I feel strongly that we should rather have a total ban go to the public, the general vote and the democratic process. And I don't think that sunsetting at the end of the 2 year period that automatic sunsetting, that takes out that public input. If this automatically sunsets in 2 years and the council doesn't happen to get on it and take care of business, even though they see that, oh, this isn't really working for our community or for the state, that could just sunset and we'll be stuck with the ramifications of that. Or having to put a secondary vote out to once again extend that moratorium for 2 more years. That's a lot to be considered for our voters. And I think we need to have public input. We need to have a chance for people to say, and I think there's much more information now on 109 that there was initially. I know when the initial ballot came through, I keep my sample ballots. I'm kind of that way. And I think the information provided in that was misleading compared to what we know now about psilocybin mushrooms. And I think knowing what we know now and the environment that we are in and things we've witnessed with Measure 110 makes us more aware as a public of our safety. And public safety is number one. And when we have a police chief that says that supports a ban, I trust him. I don't know a lot of the maneuverings of our public safety and the police, but I do know that that's a consideration for us as a city council. We need to consider public safety. And if the best vote is to ban this for public safety and for this to be not a part of our small police department to handle the ramifications of this and the legislative faux pas that may come down the road as they go, I strongly suggest that we put a ban before a public vote rather than just simply the 2-year moratorium with a possible sunsetting occur or a repetitive vote. We have repealed laws before. We have repealed things before. That's a possibility. If this is a magic bullet that creates utopia of healing and well-being, we can repeal it. But until then, we have got to consider public safety. We've got to consider the well-being of all our citizens and let each one of them have a vote regarding that.
Thank you. Councillor Andrade.
Unless Councillor Lehman or someone else has another thing to say, I would like to make a motion.
There's people with their hands up, but if you want to make.
Oh, I can't see. I mean, I still want to hear what people say, but yeah, I would like to make the first motion. I move to adopt the proposed ballot title to place a 2-year moratorium on psilocybin product manufacturing and service centers before the voters for the November 2022 general election.
Okay. So we have a motion made by Councillor Andrade. Do we have a second? So we have a second by Councillor Biscombe. Any further discussion? Councillor Cosby.
I would like to speak to my motion, please.
Please do.
So I don't think we actually know more than we did before. That is absolute fact because the rules are still being made. So in order to preemptively just ban it outright, it feels wrong, especially considering the fact that we did vote on this as a community and we did vote to allow for these facilities and manufacturing, or I don't remember the exact words, but just be allowing psilocybin production and administration to happen in the city. I think also that considering the health benefits, yes, of course, there's going to be side effects, but there are side effects for Tylenol. If you have Tylenol and drink, you're at risk for liver failure. Like there's always risks in everything. And I think that the benefits that this could bring to the people who need it is so important. It is so important. Mental health, like we're in a pandemic still. And how much have we been talking about mental health being important now in particular? Like this, I don't see how banning them outright is going to, yes, there might be facilities in Corvallis if they don't have time, place, manner restrictions the way that we do with cannabis. but that's also like cutting out people who are less fortunate who need it, who maybe don't have a car, or it takes, they have to take off of work to take the bus to go to a facility for multiple hours. There's just there's so much inequity in general that it's harmful to assume that anyone can just go to the other city to get psilocybin that they might need to function. Same with cannabis, for that matter. And I think that if we just put the moratorium before everyone, like, we can always, regardless of what the people vote on, we can still put those time, manner, place restrictions on, just as Council Pratt said. We can do that at any point in time. And I think that we're doing a great disservice to our community members if we don't allow for a moratorium as being the option. And additionally, the opportunity for input from the community on those time, place, manner restrictions. I mean, what better way to figure out like how exactly we want to like implement or have these, facilities, especially because, as we've said, like, we could still effectively have a ban. So I feel like allowing for the moratorium will allow for that added conversation so that we get more information from people about what it is that we want as a community. And that way we'll know if in fact medical practitioners are being left out of the conversation, or whether they just aren't involved at this step, or, any of the other concerns brought up by people tonight and in emails. So I ask that we please choose the moratorium.
Thank you. Councilor Causey.
Thank you. I will be voting against this motion for a number of reasons, many of which the Crockers articulated very well. But I believe that this measure was sold to the voters as a panacea that would cure all of Oregon's mental health issues, which is totally false. And I'd like to read to you parts of an interview with Andre Orso from the Oregon Health Authority. This was recorded last year with OPB, and he is the administrator for the Center for Health Protection at OHA. And I'd like to point out the basic nature of the questions that have to be dealt with, and that I don't believe have been dealt with or will be dealt with in 2 years and 3 years, or probably even 5 years. He said as follows: I think we need to look at who would be a suitable client or patient for this type of therapy. It's not going to be for everybody. We have some indication that people who've experienced psychoses, that it might not be an appropriate form of therapy for that individual. And we're also looking at the safety of the product itself, looking at potency. How much of the psychoactive chemicals are present in particular species of mushrooms? What species are appropriate for this type of therapy, and what forms of product would be suitable for this type of therapy? So are we looking at a synthetic form? Are we looking at whole mushrooms? These are the types of questions that need to be resolved, that I believe have been resolved. I believe that any underlying clinical studies are virtually non-existent. They are being undertaken, but no phase 3 clinical trials have been started yet. So this is something that we should facilitate for our citizens. I have to echo what Councilor Nielsen said. This is not safe for our community. It's not in the interest of our community, and I support a total ban. Couple of other things I'd like to point out, or some made a comment later in the conversation. Some of the questions that we're looking at is, what is psilocybin good for, basically? That's how basic the lack of knowledge is. This is the Oregon Health Authority's fact sheet on psilocybin. What are the benefits of psilocybin? Research suggests psilocybin may help address depression, anxiety, trauma, and addiction. Studies also found it can increase spiritual well-being. Well, it's pretty clear to me why the medical community has distanced itself from this ballot measure. And I don't think it's in the interest of our community, and I support a total ban on it.
And may I respond to?
Sure, go ahead.
Councilor Andrade was concerned about those who actually need it, and their access to it. If we ban this, they won't have access. But if my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Councilor Pratt, is the ban will not exclude the medically prescribed by a doctor use of psilocybin mushrooms. So we are not keeping anyone who medically needs this substance from getting it. We're just saying that that for our town, the safety and just too many uncertainties to make a safe vote on just a moratorium. There's too many unknowns. And I don't think that we will be keeping anyone from getting anything that medically is prescribed. Yes.
Thank you. Councilor Pratt?
So I do not believe that there is going to be a distinction between medically prescribed by a doctor and someone that is doing this with the assistance of the facilitator. As of right now, I do not know of any regulations that would allow for allow for such a distinction or the like. I'm not sure of an actual medical prescription from a doctor that has an MD. I don't know what that looks like right now. What I do know is that with this particular measure, it was specifically talking about licensing individuals to manufacture, licensing laboratories to test, licensing service centers to house the product and the workers, and then licensing facilitators that are with the individuals as they consume the product. So I don't actually know how an MD fits into it, to be quite frank.
Thank you. And Councilor Biscoe?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of things shared tonight, and I really appreciate the Crockers for bringing their testimony tonight, but also our email testimonies that we received. Councilor Causey, you bring some really good points from a year ago from OHA, but there's some facts in this space. I think we're a little bit far down the road at this point. If I'm understanding correctly, if the city of Philomath residents voted to approve this measure in the first place at a 60-40, and please, Council Pratt, if you can confirm, it won't matter. Ultimately, the vote goes to the people, whether we propose this moratorium or whether we propose a ban. The city of Philomath residents and voters can actually determine that outcome, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so whether moratorium or whether a ban really is irrelevant because it is still left to the voters. I would also like to express my concern that there are 5 more months before Oregon Health Authority actually comes with their final rulemaking on this and their final expectations. We're making a vote very premature when we look at the legal language of what they're going to define by December 31. And I'd like to think that we would consider what that final legislation actually is going to look like before even we take any actions. So there's several things going on. We've got the vote going on that goes to the voters. Doesn't matter whether we propose a moratorium or a ban. We do not have all of the information to make an informed time, place, manner decision or any other decisions at this point. It feels like we wouldn't want to do that, I would hope, in any other space and any other decision that we would be making as a council, making that premature decision without all the facts. I think we can look at a lot of the testimony that was provided to give us some of that more perspective. But at the end of the day, the moratorium could be voted down. the ban could be voted down, and I think it's in the best interest of Philomath that we propose that moratorium. That's a good faith effort that we're going to look at the language and that we move forward with time, place, and manner discussions on the council.
Thank you, Councilor Pratt.
I just want to point out that regardless of what decision council comes to tonight, being no ban, moratorium, or a permanent ban, the city attorney's office's next advice is going to simply be that council should still look at and consider whether they want to institute time, place, manner restrictions in the chance that the ballot measure fails, or in the chance that if council does not send the ballot title to the voters, that they at least look at if they want to change anything or add any additional restrictions that are otherwise not in the ORS.
Thank you. Council.
Point of order. Oh, sorry. I was just going to let you know that, yeah, their hands are raised. Councilor Lehman and Councilor Lodes.
Councilor Lowe.
Well, I think Councilor Lehman was before me.
It's okay. Go ahead.
Me, go ahead.
Go ahead. It'd be more time efficient.
Well, I appreciate the arguments on both sides, and I can see both sides. Fundamentally, yes, this should go to the voters, so I'm going to vote for that. It needs to do that. I agree. I really like the way that Councilor Bisco has put the argument. I think that we do have a lot of latitude in how we want to design things, especially through the time, place, and manner restrictions. And I think that at that level of fine tuning, we can more suitably address whatever the concerns are that folks feel in terms of public safety and so forth. So I think that's one point. Another is the OHA rules are still in development. Granted, the timing and when they're expected to come out isn't very reassuring, but with a 2-year moratorium, we do have a much better sense of how things will progress. I guess I'm more optimistic that things can happen within a fairly short period of time, within 2 years. If it's something we don't like, then the restrictions we put in place should plug that hole. If it's something that we want to refer back, I don't have a problem in doing that again. If it's necessary, we feel it's in the public interest, I think a council at that time would do that. I also think the citizens and whatever council's in place next year are going to be very much on top of this subject, no matter what the outcome of the vote is. No one in the community, I'm sure, is going to allow the council to forget that, oh yeah, this has got to be taken care of if there's still a question about the safety of it. And I guess everybody has a different idea of mental health and what the appropriate treatment is and so on. And there's a lot of faith put in the medical community, but there are folks in the population that there are alternative therapies that are out there. They don't necessarily conform to the accepted standard, but they are legitimate. There are a tremendous number of studies being done around the world about this. Oregon definitely is a test case. Lots of other states are going to be looking at how this turns out. But, the citizens of Oregon as a whole have approved this measure. And I think we can do at this level a ban. I think a 2-year ban is appropriate. So that's what I'm voting for.
Thank you. Councilor Lehman.
Oh, yeah, I had a question for Council Pratt. If we move forward with the total ban and it does pass, is it appropriate and/or is it legal for us to still craft time, place, and manner codes for the city, given that the citizens have put in place a ban? Does that make sense what I'm asking? Since
it does, and I would say that yes, you can absolutely do that. Again, one might say that we're conflicting, but given what conversation would probably be surrounding implementing these time, place, manner restrictions, being that they would be in in preparation for potentially removing that ban. I don't think that there's no legal problem, and I don't think that there would be a confusion problem with that. Again, so long as it's at least recorded in minutes, so people aren't looking back and being kind of confused.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just offer a little bit of my perspective. I don't really like the idea of psilocybin service centers being in Philomath myself. That's my own personal opinion. I have concerns about putting a total ban before the voters and then seeing them turn that or vote that down, just because they may not fully support that. But I do think it's important that there be a period of time where we can assess what's going on within the state and within the state rules for ballot measure 109. So I could support either the 2-year ban or a total ban. But yeah, I don't really know how I feel about it yet, but it's complicated, and I do recognize that putting the time, place, manner restrictions into code prior to December 31st could very well be in the best interest of Philomath as well. So yeah, those are just my thoughts again. Councilor Andrade.
2 things. One, I wanted to let you know Councilor Lehman's hand's up again. The other is that I appreciate hearing other people's thoughts, and I understand that there are concerns of safety and such for all people. I do really want to reinforce the idea that this can be an enormously helpful medication for people. And just want to point to, I didn't have this, I had forgotten about this, but there is an article from the New York Times that came out last month, June 24th, titled "After 6-Decade Hiatus, Experimental Psychedelic Therapy Returns to the VA." And I just want to let you know that, like, in that article, it very much talks about how, you know, the VA is working with this, with MDMA and with psilocybin, and they are seeing promising results. And as a community that values our veterans, I think it is an important thing to remember, because it can help with things such as PTSD, which a lot of veterans experience. So just wanted to.
Thank you, Councilor Lehman.
Yeah, I'm definitely in favor of either the 2-year or the outright ban. I don't know that we can work to put time, place, and manner rules into effect until we know what the actual rules that we would be restricting are. So I don't know that we have an opportunity to do that before the legislation would take effect on January 1st, 2023, since the rules aren't technically due until like midnight the day before that. So I think we should definitely put something before the voters and not just to do nothing. My preference is the 2-year. I do think that this type of treatment has been in the public discussion for at least the past 4 or 5 years that I'm personally aware of. And I think there is an opportunity for it to do great good in the community. But I also agree with the police chief, for example, that we have to have the right restrictions in place to make sure that it's used properly and doesn't cause any public safety issues outside of the use within the centers. So I'll vote for this measure, but if this fails and someone proposes the outright ban, I will vote for that also.
Thank you, Councilor Nielsen.
If I'm not, I read that same article, but if I'm understanding Councilor Andrade, that was medically supervised at the VA, not just public facilitators that are trained that were being, so that's that's apples and oranges and what we're considering here for our city. Medically supervised is not the same as facilitators in a retail, even though there is a state licensing, we're not sure exactly the type of license that will be required, the training, whether there'll be any medical expertise. I think there's just so many unknowns. And when we're already concerned about legislating the time, place, and manner restrictions, when that's a big concern for us, isn't that a kind of a warning light that this is a substance that we want to be careful with? That maybe it's not just let's see a moratorium for 2 years and let's see what the state comes up with and see how people utilize this, and if it's used recreationally, if there are criminal problems or other ramifications of this public usage. If we're so concerned about this time, place, and manner, isn't it also a concern that maybe we should just not have it currently available for us, and that this ban gives us a chance to really take a breath and see what unfolds with this usage, and without putting it into our small town. And based on the popular emails that we've received, numerous ones from community members, we talk a lot as a council about community input, about public input, about we want to hear from the public. We have heard from the public, a good portion of them, and they are saying, no, we don't want this, please ban this. And so when we vote for a moratorium, we are ignoring the voices that have taken time to let their voices be heard. We're ignoring their input. Now, is that correct? Even if it's only, as an educator, they'll say for every email that the, I can't remember, is it for the CBS, NBC, and ABC, we received a Vita study that for every one email, it represented 5,000 individuals. Well, we received numerous emails from citizens that want the ban, and maybe it's not just that is the climate. And when Mrs. Crocker spoke about the climate of our city, I think that's the climate. They are concerned. They would like a ban. And I think we just can't silence their voice by saying, oh, we'll give you 2 years. We're going to give you 2 years on this. I think we're making a wrong choice.
Thank you. Yep, city reporter. Chris.
Thank you. So I don't have a vote on this, but I'm going to cash in my chip here for the opportunity to participate in deliberation. I've read quite a bit on this as well. I support an outright ban. I was opposed to Measure 109 when it came before the state. I think that we've maybe cautiously looked at other times when we've relied on state legislatures to decide what is good medicine and what's not good medicine. And frankly, I'd much rather leave that in the hands of
Point of order.
than my
I
doctor.
don't think that this is appropriate.
Councilor Gray, I'm going to go ahead and allow the city manager to weigh in.
Is this a precedent?
As a city manager or as an individual, because he just said that he didn't vote in favor of it.
I'm allowed to deliberate with the council. It's part of one of my rights as a city manager.
City attorney, can you weigh in on whether or not city manager should be providing input?
I don't feel comfortable doing it off the cuff. If I could have a minute really quickly to consult with some of the charter language and the like.
Sure, we'll take a minute. We'll take a 3-minute break.
Thank you.
there she is. Welcome back, everyone. Ms. Pratt, did you come back to us with some information?
Yes, I did. So according to section 5.3 of the Philomath Charter, that's 5.3 subsection 7, the city manager is entitled to sit with council and take part in all council discussions, but shall have no vote on questions before council. So Chris can speak to this. He just can't have a vote on the final decision as to what ordinance, ballot title, the like that we send towards the voters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, Aaron. So as I was stating, I'd be opposed to, I would support an outright ban. The motion on the table right now is for a 2-year moratorium, which I would only support if an outright ban wasn't voted on. From the staff level, there's concerns. I know at the police department with the chief of police, we heard those concerns at the last meeting. I want to make sure that those concerns are reiterated here. There's just so many unknowns. There's concerns about a lot of the things that would affect time, place, and manner. But again, I just rationalize, you know, how many times do we look for time, place, and manner restrictions on pretty much anything that comes out of a medical doctor's office. I can't think of time, place, manner restrictions on where doctor's offices go. There's several alternative medicines, be it any number of things that are considered alternative medicine that we also don't look at time, place, manner restrictions on. I think the fact that a legislature is allowing and oftentimes recommending that cities look at time, place, manner restrictions is very, very telling. And I do think that the medical community is looking at this very carefully. And for patients that have a need here, they'll be able to access those through the medical professionals. But to have this be a one-stop shop where people can either self-diagnose or they can have limited supervision, I just think is bad for Philomath outright. So I would support a no vote on the 2-year ban and see if we can get votes for a full ban. And if that doesn't go through, then maybe we readdress and look at the 2-year ban again. But from my standpoint, from the city manager, from my professional opinion, would be that we look at an outright ban for the city of Philomath. I think that's in the city's and the Philomath residents' best interest. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Councillor Kazi.
I just wanted to say that I fully support the development of psilocybins as a treatment for conditions for which it has shown, for which there is some evidence that it could be effective. But these should be done under controlled clinical conditions, and they should be subject to FDA regulation, which I recognize will take more time than many people would like to wait. But I don't believe it's appropriate for us as a community to be supporting treatment using this substance when the clinical effectiveness and dosage is really undetermined. All of the rules that have been put in place have nothing to do with dosage. And you heard the chief of police say it. They don't even know what doses to use. And I don't believe for a minute that will be resolved in 2 years. It also occurs to me that there are probably people out there today who are using psilocybins, who know how to get a hold of them, who know how to use them, for whom this will probably make that more difficult unless they're growing them themselves. So why should they have to go to Corvallis or anywhere else and sit with some counselor and spend for a certain amount of hours, trying to do what they could have done anyway and probably will continue doing.
Thank you. Councillor Biscoe.
So I'm going to go back to the fact that we are way outside of the whole point here, which is we are not making the decision here. The voters of Philomath are making that decision. I've heard, and I recognize and agree with what we're talking about, but we're not experts in this space either. We do not have the information from OHA. We do not know what they're going to say. We're speculating on what they might say, and we are having discussions about things that are outside of our scope of expertise. Our responsibility is to look at all of the information, which we don't have yet. The 2-year moratorium allows that. The voters could overturn that completely just as much as they could say, no, we don't want to ban either. Recognizing that Philomath has voted in 60 to 40, if that's accurate, 60% in favor of this, the moratorium not only acknowledges that, it's more likely that they will allow that space because we're acknowledging that their preference is to go with approving this type of, these types of products, I'll call them, or these types of medicines. So the moratorium says, yes, we hear you. We'd like to get all the information. We're going to turn it to the voters. We are not actually making the vote here tonight. And I think it's important. And with that, with respect, Councillor Causey, I'd like to call the question because we've been talking about a lot of things that aren't relevant to actually how we're going to move forward. We've been talking about it for about an hour and 5 minutes.
Great. So the question has been called. Unless anybody agrees or disagrees with that, we can go ahead and vote on it.
I would just comment first for the numbers on the vote.
Actually, I'm sorry. Can't have any.
I'm sorry, I'm opposed to calling the question.
Okay, so we have a motion to, or we have an opposition to the question. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so with
Since
that,
that's my motion, can I make a comment?
actually, no. With that, we're just going to
Okay,
vote
then
on.
point of order.
Yes, go ahead.
I believe that a while back we voted on 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes per council on a topic such as this. We've been talking
Okay.
considerably.
So
in
that's
that
okay.
space.
So that's irrelevant to the point of order.
Actually
No,
not.
it is. So we're just going to vote on whether or not to call the question. That's so. Is that okay? That's all we have to do, and then you can talk about it afterwards.
It's not open for discussion.
That's right. It's a privileged. It's a privileged motion. So with that, all in favor of calling the question and moving forward with the vote, please raise your hand and say aye. Okay. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. Okay, so motion carries. We're going to go ahead and vote. All in favor of 2-year moratorium, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay.
Nay.
So motion carries 4-3. Excellent. So with that, we are now moving on to the next topic of conversation, conversation about the League of Oregon Cities legislative priorities. And we had asked for councilors to submit their priorities in advance. And we have 4 folks that placed their priorities or went ahead and did that. And then we have others who did not. So I'm wondering if we can, city reporter, see if we can just get those inputs from those 3 counselors, take a 3-minute break and then come back and.
Point of order. I would like to have discussion on this topic.
And we can, however, I'm wondering if we can consolidate that input all at once, so then we have something to discuss.
I'm one of those people who didn't submit specifically because I wanted to have discussions, and I don't feel comfortable giving priorities without having that discussion because I might change my mind.
Okay. So, Councilor Andrade, go ahead and open up the conversation.
Well, I wasn't necessarily prepared to do so. I don't know what would be better. Would be to hear the summary of what has been submitted so far, or if anyone just wants to jump in and talk about their priorities. I think having some guidance on how you would like this conversation to happen would be helpful.
Yeah, my idea was to come forward and share all of our priorities beforehand, but that didn't work for you. So I thought you had a better idea. Councilor Visco?
So I too agree that these are pretty extensive priorities. Having some conversation about them might be useful, as in maybe we can just do a bullet point or just a summary on each one. there's some obvious, we got asked to do this vote today, submit that, but I do think that not having any context as to why the 4 counselors that did return this decided that these were their priorities kind of leaves us not being able to give good advice to the League of Oregon Cities lobbying staff. So I would like to hear that discussion as well.
Okay, Councilor Cosby.
I just wanted to suggest, I believe that the deadline for submitting this vote has been extended.
Yes, it has. It was extended to August 19th.
So I'm wondering if we could table this until our first meeting in August. And giving the other counselors more time to submit their priorities and discuss them as a whole.
Chris.
I guess I haven't heard that it was a lack of time that the counselors needed. It was lack of discussion. So even if a final decision isn't made tonight, it might still be helpful. Looking for Councilor Andrade specifically, she's asked for conversation about these topics so she can help make decisions on prioritization. So I don't know that just tabling the discussion tonight helps her specifically. I don't want to speak for you, Councilor Andrade, but that's what I heard from you, that just tabling it tonight is not going to help her come to a conclusion.
So I can mention my priorities. My big priorities I identified were infrastructure funding to support needed housing, economic development incentives, community resilience and wildfire planning, continuing investments in renewable energy, and infrastructure financing and resilience. So those are topics that are generally important to me that I identified. Councilor Andrade.
I guess to Councilor Bisco's point, just kind of being able to discuss each of them and like why specifically those things, as well as like there's a couple of them that seem similar to each other, but I don't know if there's like additional information, because looking at this document in the top right hand corner, it says table of contents. So I don't know if that means that there's additional information on each of these topics. Because some of them have like quite a bit of information and others only have like a couple sentences. And some of them are similar in the sense that like, let's see, investment in community climate planning resources versus adequate funding for state climate initiatives, or like the housing ones, where there's like slight differences. And I'm not sure if I understand what those differences are. And like one might be better than the other, if not both. So.
And none of us wrote this, so none of us can really speak to all the detail, but Chris.
I understand that, but my question about the table of contents is a valid one.
Chris?
Yeah, so the table of contents, Councilor Andrade is just referencing the first part. I think that just got carried over in a header, but there is a table of contents in the beginning that kind of gets you to what page you're looking for. And I think it being on the top right and the header of each of those is just a carryover. So I don't think that that's of any significance per se. I will just say, having done this for years now, the League of Oregon Cities, all of these topics are of interest to the league. They're likely going to lobby on each of these topics, but what they're looking for from the cities is that when they go to a legislator, a group of legislators, they want to be able to say 57% of cities that responded to our questionnaire said that this was one of their top 5 priorities. It doesn't mean that they're not going to lobby for the other items. It just means that they're looking for some statistical data that they can use as they're lobbying legislators on what's important to cities. And so we're not necessarily picking like these are the only 5 things that you're going to talk about as the league. It's a matter of, what are the things that are most important to cities like the city of Philomath and the rest of the cities throughout the state that they can really go to bat for us when they're talking to the legislators on. So don't feel like you have to pick 5 and everything else is going to get ignored. It's what are the 5 most important to the city of Philomath. That's the kind of data that they're looking for. So it's not all or nothing here.
Thank you. Councilor Bisco.
So I appreciate that perspective, but I'll add this one as well. Like all organizations, there's a limit to staff. And I've worked with the lobbying team I think also Council Lehman has as well as a member. So I am a member of the League of Oregon Cities Board. There will be limitations to where they can prioritize. So I do think it is additionally important. Yes, those statistics, that's true. But I do think that it's important that we prioritize, and they're asking all cities to do so, to give them guidance on where to put their emphasis of their staffing resources before our legislature. I'd also like to say, since we don't really know which direction we want to go on how to review this, I would like to share my #1 priority topic. If that is okay. At this
That'd be
time.
great.
Super. So I really do support the ones that we have on this list that are identified as top priorities. So infrastructure, financing, and resilience. Staff also is part of that recommendation. Infrastructure funding to support needed housing, and also economic development incentives have risen to the top. One that I think got overlooked, and I think it's because of how it's worded, is the full funding and alignment for state land use initiatives. And that goes directly to, as I'm reading it, the climate friendly and equitable communities rulemaking that's going to occur here, well, has occurred actually, the interim and their final recommendations to move these forward. I'll read from off of just the internet briefly. These rules will apply to cities and counties in the 8 metropolitan areas with populations over 50,000. That does include Albany and the Corvallis metropolitan population areas. Of course, we are part of that metro population area, and these will have impacts to us, although differently than a city that's the size of Corvallis or Albany, for example. In the Community Development and Policy Committee, what was identified is the background to this full funding and alignment for state land use initiatives is recent legislation and executive orders have made significant changes to the state's land use planning process, including increasing burdens for local government. While the League of Oregon Cities shares the state's policy goals, these updates have resulted in extensive, continuous, and sometimes conflicting rulemaking efforts that are not supported by adequate state funding. And I'll pause just briefly. Many of us remember House Bill 2001 and the impacts of what that will be as we grow into bigger cities, but unfunded mandates just in general and home rule conversations. Cities simply do not have the staff capacity or resources needed to implement current requirements. Existing planning updates should be streamlined to enable simpler, less costly implementation, and any new proposal should be aligned with existing requirements. Prospectively, Springfield, Eugene Springfield area is one of these areas. Springfield in particular has expressed some very great concerns about this type of legislation without those funding sources identified. And I do think that in the best interest of local government for Philomath and making sure that we have state funding, if this council, the council members have not had a look at those climate friendly and equitable community rulemaking documents, they're extensive, but there's a lot of implications for us as well. So I support the other 4 that have 3 X's on them already. You can add a 4th one to that, but I definitely would like to see that this council consider prioritizing the full funding and alignment for state land use initiatives.
Thank you. Anyone else want?
Can I just, you said the other 4, there are 3 with 3 X's. And did you mean property tax reform also?
No, I'm sorry, did I say, so 3 with 3 X's, I would be the 4th. You could add a 4th X, is I think what I said.
All right.
Do you have a 5th?
And then the full funding alignment.
I only have just, those are the only 4 that I
Okay,
was
that's fine. I just wanna make
throwing
sure
an
I got
X
all
out
of
at this
yours
point.
recorded.
Anyone else have any input?
Councilor Lehman has his hand up.
Councilor Lehman.
Yeah, so I was on the LOC committee that put this list together. Just to point out a couple of things, the larger cities are very, very, very interested in the attorney-client privilege stuff, the sunset of employees stuff, and a lot of things that it seems like won't really have a huge impact for the city of Philomath. Although, our chief has retired and is under contract now, so we do take advantage of that, and that potentially could end if that law that allows him to continue to work as our chief of police, even though he's retired, is allowed to sunset. So just something to consider there. But for sure, the infrastructure is my #1 priority. The second one for me is the road user fee. Certainly, as we've been putting a lot more attention towards electric vehicle use, there needs to be established a way to continue to collect funds so that we can maintain highways, bridges, that kind of good stuff. So I think it's going to be very important that we address the road user fee, the aligning of the land use with the other policies. We've got a lot of firsthand experience as to the effects of that not aligning with land use decisions, and let's say, DOT's adamant refusal to increase any capacity on the road systems, even though they want to build out the very far ends of the road network as much as possible. Mobility services kind of fit into that as well. It seems like the state has a very high priority in limiting the number of vehicle trips, but not any alacrity in building out the transportation infrastructure to support that philosophy. And then the wildfire coordination and preparedness also would seem to be significant for the city of Philomath. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Andrade.
I also don't know if you see that Chris's hand is raised, but I was hoping Councilor Lehman could talk a bit more about the road user fee. That was one of the ones I wasn't entirely sure how that would be, like what exactly it is. Is it like a toll thing or like?
No, it's more that you would pay for the actual number of miles driven on the public roads. You would pay, instead of relying solely on the gas tax to fund infrastructure, maintenance and servicing. And the anticipation is that those funds are going to dwindle as fewer people are buying gas. Then obviously you're going to collect a smaller amount of gas tax. So some questions about that, though, are how intrusive is that process going to be? And can you, for example, distinguish road miles on a county road versus a state road versus a city road? Do you have to divide the money up according to that process, or still use what the state is using now, which is based on population? So Philomath does get transportation funds from the state based on our population right now, not necessarily based on how many vehicles go through our city on the roads. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, so I guess it's not necessarily, yeah, I guess so more or less it might be kind of like those, like, are there like trackers and like the toll cards or whatever? And then you just, or like, is it literally just you pay the state and it's regardless of where it is, or?
It's not.
I know
defined.
it's not, sure, yeah.
So you could theoretically, like a lot of insurance companies now, if you plug something into one of the ports on your car, they can see if you're driving safely and adjust your rates. You could theoretically do the same thing for determining which roads you were driving on. That seems very intrusive, so a lot of people aren't in favor of that. It could also be just an odometer check, and when you go to renew your registration, you report your odometer, and then you have to pay a tax based on the difference in your previous odometer reading. And probably somewhere in between those two things is what will end up.
Okay, thank you so much. That's really helpful.
And Chelsea?
I may be saying some of the same thing that Chris was going to say. We do actually have more employees than just the chief of police who are currently retired, including our finance director and several part-time staff members. So I just wanted to point that out so that people know that we have more than just one employee, so might be more impacted than you're thinking.
Thank you. Councilor Causey?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple of items. First, in going through these, I thought they were all important. I would like to see them all get done. I also found it kind of frustrating because some of them struck me as being sort of low-hanging fruit. You know, how hard can it be to extend a bill that is going to sunset and has already sunset 3 times and been extended? So, and as opposed to something like property tax reform, which seems like it could probably take years to get done. So I found that aspect of it kind of frustrating when I thought in terms of staffing. I also wanted to mention that one of my top priorities was the first one on the list, infrastructure financing and resilience. And I chose that over the infrastructure funding to support needed housing because the second one, although it sounded like it was geared more toward low income housing, at least our infrastructure problems are not restricted to a given area. They're pretty broad based. So I didn't want to have to deal with any restrictions as to the type of housing that was being supported by it. The other thought that came to my mind is how many of these initiatives would be lobbied by other groups. For example, with respect to the broadband initiatives, I would imagine there are a number of industry groups that would be lobbying for similar things. So it was hard in making choices. It was hard to guess about them.
I thought it was interesting in regards to alcohol revenues that there has not been a tax increase since 1978. And it lists here that that we have the lowest beer tax in the country. And so I think it's time for that. I put that down as a thing to review just for the timeliness of, that's a lot of years past with no looking closely to see how it could best benefit our state and the numerous ways in which a local sales tax option or other option could benefit citizens.
So it looks like we have 4 clear top choices amongst ourselves, and then we just have to identify that 5th one, which seems a little bit less clear, but we have 2 tied. It looks like one, it's the full funding for alignment for state land use initiatives, and also the property tax reform. Councilor Andrade.
I would like to throw my support behind the full funding and alignment for state land use initiatives as well for the same reasons as Councilor Bisco stated, and just understanding to some extent just the fact that we have been chronically underfunded in the state for these for the initiatives that we're expected to meet. So that one, as well as the property tax reform, I will also, because it is broken from what I understand. I'm a renter, so I know less about that, but still affected by it. And then digital equity and inclusion. I'm pretty sure most, if not everyone, knows how important I find communication with the community and and ensuring accessibility. So I think that's no surprise there. And then I'll have to come back for the other ones. But yeah, and Councilor Lehman has his hand up.
Councilor Lehman.
Thanks. I guess I wanted to emphasize my my support for the mobility services just one more time. There's a lot of work that's going on in this field, but it's all super disjointed, and I'll just give an example. So Oregon State and Lynn Benton and Benton County and Lynn County are working together along with ODOT to build these mobility centers. They're proposing at least 2 on campus at Oregon State, one at LB, and then some smaller forms of that in the cities of Corvallis and Albany. And at absolutely none of those places is there any place designated for you to park your car. And as a person who travels for their living, obviously I'm in Florida right now, it would be great if I could get on some sort of public transportation and get to an airport Right now, there is a shuttle service that I could get called Anthony's. It picks up either on campus or at the Hilton Garden Inn, neither of those places at which I can park my vehicle. So how do I get to the transportation to utilize these mobility services? And that seems to be a piece that is missing from consideration and basically speaks to the point that I've been making, that the state seems to have a lot of really, really good ideas in the big picture, but lacks a lot of emphasis on details, such as how people can take advantage of these wonderful services. Thanks.
Thank you. And Chris, question, can we provide just a ranking of the top like 9 things that we identify? Is that something we can do, or do we just have to give them the top 5?
No, the online survey just allows for 5 responses, and they're not necessarily ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just, here's our top 5.
So I'm going to propose that we have this conversation for 5 more minutes, and then that folks who want to change their votes can change them with city recorder, and then we come back together and then just push forward whatever is ranked the highest. But that's what I'm going to propose. Councilor Bisco.
Yeah, I had a couple questions for Councilor Lehman. Could you clarify if you are talking about the new mobility services on page 10?
You know, it's weird because they bundle the way that they want to address the LLC has chosen to address the mobility services in a way that's very confusing to me. So they also consider like the scooter apps that you can use in cities that have scooters as mobility services, for example. And I guess I look at it more as transportation services than mobility services, but mobility services would also include like the dial-a-bus services that we have that support different members of the community that can't drive or don't have access to transportation, things like that as well. It seems like the general term mobility services has been spread around pretty thin, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Was there some specific one that
Yes, I just want to know which one on this list. It looks like the new mobility services. It says the LOC supports the entry and utilization of a variety of new mobility services that support a safe, sustainable, and equitable multimodal transportation system. I know some folks don't know what multimodal is, so that's more than just our cars, right? It's what you're talking about, the park and rides, the buses, the alternatives.
Right.
While preserving local government's authority to regulate these services and ensure public and consumer safety. Is that the one you're talking about? Is my
correct? Yes, that is the one I'm talking about. Yes.
And you mentioned partners ODOT, and I didn't hear the rest. You were talking about LBCC having one of these centers and Oregon State University, these mobility centers, you call
mobility
them?
hubs, right? Yes.
And who was talking about that? ODOT
and Benton County and Lynn County and LBCC and Oregon State.
So this will support our reducing parking space needs and also transportation impacts when we look at long-term visioning for the city as well, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Andrade.
That was the one that I was trying to look for. I agree wholeheartedly with that. Thank you for the additional clarifications, Councilor Lehman. I will also throw my support behind new mobility services, as well as infrastructure financing and resilience. So those are my 5.
So city recorder, do you need everybody to email you or come to you and talk to you if they want to change their votes? Should we do that?
Well, if anybody wants to change their votes, that's fine. If everybody would like to confirm or commit, I have everybody's written down. I can tell you that, infrastructure financing and resilience has a majority of support. Infrastructure funding to support needed housing has a majority support. Economic development incentives have a majority of support. Then we have property tax reform that has 3, and community resilience.
I'm sorry, I can't hear what's being said.
Yeah, I'll do that.
I think someone's mic is,
I will repeat what was said in just a moment.
Could we just take a vote? Could you read the list and we just take a vote and eliminate a lot of back and forth emails and such on your side of things?
Here, and you have them, I marked them with the dashes. Those are the 5 that have.
Okay,
And I wanted to change one of my votes.
okay. From,
Take off the lodging tax flexibility. And I would like to include the community resilience and wildfire planning. So that's another vote for that one. Thank you.
so there's 5, well, here. So the 4 that are clear at the top is infrastructure, financing, and resilience, infrastructure funding to support needed housing, community resiliency and fire planning, and then economic development incentives. There are then 2 that are tied, and we can kind of decide which amongst those 2 we would prefer to push forward. It's either full funding / alignment for state land use initiatives or property tax reform.
And mobility services, where does that land on that?
It
list?
did not make it up to
So
that.
there's 3 for mobility services and 3 for property tax. What I have is 3 for property tax reform. So we don't know because we added new ones, but 3 for the full funding alignment for state land use initiatives, 3 for property tax reform, and 3 for mobility services.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break and let everybody submit what they would prefer? and
Since
then
they
we come back.
extended the deadline, I'm gonna say this really as loud as I can. Hopefully it picks up. Since they extended the deadline, why don't I re-summarize and place it on the consent agenda for the next meeting? And if I got it right, then you can approve it as part of the consent agenda. If there needs to be any changes, you can pull it off and continue discussion.
Okay. So those of you that,
Or we could just vote on those 3 that have a tie.
why don't we just, let's just go with everybody emailing Ruth, the city recorder, their top 5. And that will come back to us at the next council meeting and we can move forward. Councilor Crosby.
Just a question, the first 2 that involve infrastructure financing and infrastructure funding, I'm wondering if those are duplicative or, I mean, would our vote be better used for something less closely related?
I'm going to encourage everyone just to read it and make a decision and then submit your vote to the city recorder.
I'd like to ask Councilor Causey if you wanted to share more on that, if I could, because you've opened up a good question that we can't do via email, if you wanted to share more.
I don't necessarily have more. I mean, all I can do is read what's on the page. Christy, do you have anything to add?
Chris? You're muted.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend, if we're not going to make the decision tonight, Mayor Jones, rather than just everybody submitting 5, there's a good chance that we may not get a majority on any of those. So maybe bump that up, everybody submit their top 8, and then we'll bring back what 5 got the highest number of votes out of the 8 that each individual councilor member sent. And then we'll indicate at the staff level, we'll indicate whether all of those top 5 got a majority vote of the council members or not. And again, we can have more discussion in the next meeting, but the night's getting long. And I think if everybody submits their top 8 based on tonight's discussion, staff can bring you back a pretty good summary for your next meeting, and it should be fairly quick.
That sounds great. So let's go ahead and make that our plan. And we'll move on to get an update on the Millpond Crossing subdivision from city staff.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So I'll just hit this real quick. I included the memo to some bullet points. Just to save some time. I'm going to hit these real quick, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Feel free to just kind of interrupt as we go. I'll pause after each bullet point. This is just an update on Millpond Crossing. First bullet point is the property lot line adjustments on South 16th Street. I've got 12 planning files. They've been through Pat Depp, our city planner, has reviewed all of the applications already, anticipating that we were going to get a check for the application fee. I think it's $200 and something. I forget off the top of my head. I'll apologize for each of those. So 12 times the 200, whatever. So we're just waiting for that application fee to be submitted. The staff work has already been done on these. We can send out those decision letters. The property owners are waiting to get those decision letters so they can go to their mortgage companies and start the process with them on what they need to do to get updated legal descriptions, updated surveys. Then the mortgage company makes their final decisions, okays everything, and then it goes to the county and gets recorded. The last thing the city's going to do is just get a copy of that recording of the recorded lot. They do have to get all done at the same time because both lines on multiple properties are changing. So in essence, the city staff, we've done everything that we can do. We're waiting for a check from Mr. Miller so that we can start this side of the process. I have talked to Mr. Miller about this. I'll repeat this a couple times tonight. He's applied for a loan to pay for a lot of this phase 2 stuff and some of the phase 2B items that I'll talk about later. So there's phase 2 and phase 2B. He's applied for a loan to complete a lot of this work. He's been held up on that loan for well over a month and a half, almost 2 months now. His words, not mine, is it's a really horrible time to try to get financing for these types of projects with interest rates doing what they're doing. The secondary loan market is very skeptical about any of these loans, and the primary market is reluctant to issue these loans unless they've got a buyer lined up to purchase that loan once it's closed. And so it's taken a while to get a secondary market lender essentially on board to purchase this. They had to get kind of at the 11th hour when this was supposed to close that week. They requested an updated appraisal be done. That took a month to get scheduled, to get the new appraisal done and get submitted. So that was 4 weeks of time of delay. And then last Monday, there was a somewhat negative article about the development that came across the Gazette Times. That piqued the interest of some of the underwriters on the loan. So they wanted more information about all of the DEQ issues with the methane. So he was, Levi said he was very quick to give them that information, but then they've had to sit on that for an additional week or so, run it by the secondary market, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of these application fees specifically, as well as some other items, are pending him receiving this next round of loans from this lender. Again, that's been the delay here this last 2 months, is getting this loan in place for a multitude of reasons. He has every confidence he's going to get the loan. It's just getting through the process to get it done. So for the first bullet point, specific to lot line adjustments, city's done all we can do. I feel like Mr. Miller's done what he needs to do to try to get the loan. It's really just a matter of bad timing and waiting for this loan to come through so we can get a check from Mr. Miller. Any questions on that bullet point specific?
Councilor Biscoe.
Way back at the beginning, actually, thank you for that information. Way back at the beginning, you mentioned the update to the legal descriptions. So after these lot lines get adjusted and such, the update to legal descriptions, but you also mentioned surveys. That it sounded like they would have to be resurveyed, those properties. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and the cost of that, where is that cost expected to land then?
Mr. Miller agreed to pay that. So Mr. Miller's paying for the new legal descriptions and the new surveys to be completed and recorded.
Okay, thank you. And okay, thank you.
Yeah, we've had some conversations with the neighbors. In fact, we had a sit-down meeting with the neighbors and kind of talked through the process. And they've received a letter from the city stating the process. So I think everybody, and I've received several phone calls. and have explained to many of the neighbors up there where we're at in the process, and we are really just waiting for that loan to come through and for that check to show up at City Hall. I can't release the decisions from the city planner until I've got the application fee. That just wouldn't be right.
Can you clarify what you mean by decisions? I didn't follow that. You can't release the decisions by the city planner?
Yeah, so it's an application for a lot line adjustment. So the city planner reviews those to make sure that the lots are the adequate size, the setbacks are appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. So we do a plan review for compliance. That's the decision. So he's already done the review. Again, typically we get the application fee and then he begins his review. In this case, we are trying to be preemptive, get these done so they're ready to go. So as soon as we got the check, we could release these letters to the homeowners and let them know that the application for lot line adjustment's been approved, but they still have to go through the process of the new survey, new legal description, new recording. Councilor Lehman, you had a question?
Yeah, it was, as it seems like the Fed's going to bump interest rates again, are we concerned that we're not too far away from the point where interest rates are going to have an effect on Mr. Miller's ability to finance the continuation of this project?
Yes.
And should that be a consideration of the planning that we're going through right now with these guys?
Yeah, the recourse for this, and nobody likes me saying it, but the recourse for this is that it falls on the homeowners to have their lots and lot line setbacks compliant with the city development code. So what I'm trying to avoid is the city having to send a nasty letter to the homeowner saying your lot lines do not meet the setback requirements, you need to fix it. In which case they'll have to, the scenario then is that the homeowner then has to pay to get the application fee submitted. They have to pay for the survey. They have to pay for the re-recording. They submit to the city, we finish it up, and then they're going to look to Mr. Miller in some type of a small claims court or something, or some type of legal avenue to get reimbursed for the money they put out that Mr. Miller admitted that he's at fault for. So that's the route we're trying to avoid. I mean, that's just money out of the homeowner's pocket, but eventually we may end up there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Chris, some of the homeowners, is it true that some of the homeowners already have a lawsuit against Mr. Miller? Is that happening already? Is that what
I've not received any notice of that, but I wouldn't get notice of that. So this, the city's not received any notices, but we wouldn't. And I've not had any of those. I've not heard that from the developer or from any of the homeowners. So I've not heard that before.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Briscoe.
Thank you. So just a question, just a ballpark picture, what if this fell to the homeowners? You mentioned the application fee, a re-survey and re-recording, an estimate of what that would cost per property, or a range of what that might cost per property?
Yeah, the new survey and the new legal description are the most expensive. You're going to be anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 if you're just doing your one. If he's having all of them done at the same time, there'd be a discount there because part of that's getting somebody out on site and all that. So it'd be discounted significantly if you were doing multiple at the same time. It wouldn't be, that range for each of them, but to just have your own property done, that's probably a fair estimate. Recordings, $100 something, $100 and what's it up to, Ruth? 110, 120 per page for recording. It's a couple pages, so that's not overly significant. The big one's the survey and the legal description, which kind of come hand in hand.
And so that $3,000 to $5,000, is that both that new survey and that new legal description? Is that together in that price?
Correct.
Thank you.
Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but the county surveyor, his expectation was a single survey due to the trickle down effect of the lot line adjustments from one lot to the next. So it was going to be, he was looking for a single survey, wasn't he?
He was, which is why I say, I mean, it'd be significantly less for Mr. Miller to just do it. But if my concern is, if it does fall on individual homeowners, I guess all the individual homeowners could pool together, hire one survey and go through that, but you're talking about coordinating between 12 different property owners. That doesn't tend to usually go very smoothly. So you're gonna have some holdouts, you're gonna have some other stuff. So, you know, if each individual property owner had to do it, that's the cost to be looking at. For Mr. Miller, it's gonna be, you know, significantly less than 12 times that amount. But yeah, thank you, Ruth. That's a good point.
Did you want to hit each of the bullet points one by one?
Yeah. So any other questions on lot line adjustments? Again, as soon as we get that application fee, which, you know, could be tomorrow morning, you could say, hey, the loan came through, come in, cut a check for Ruth. We'll process the receipt and we'll mail the notices to the homeowners. And the city at that point will kind of be done with our approval process. And then it'll just be up to homeowner and Mr. Miller to
We'll
take
be
care of the service.
able to same day.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, next bullet point, open ditch behind Timothy Street houses. Developers agreed to go, well, this is new. So the ditch behind the houses on Timothy Street. Sorry, I got Ruth, do you see Mr. Mann's wanting to get in here? I'll go ahead and drop him in from the press. The ditch that's behind the houses on North Timothy Street is the original ditch that carried the water from north of the property, around the property, down and underneath to the south side of Chapel Drive. That ditch is still in use because no replacement has been constructed and approved by the city and the county yet. He has submitted plans to the city and the county to replace that ditch with the new temporary ditch, which runs east of 16th Street. He's built the majority of that, but he has not been able to connect it to the south side of Chapel Drive because at the time he was ready to do it, it was the middle of winter and Benton County was not going to issue a permit for work on that road and in that area during the bad, wet, muddy weather. And I don't blame them. So we were waiting on weather initially. This is another project that's now waiting for some of these loan funds to come through, and part of the loan coming through is going to pay for the completion of this project. So once the loan money is in hand, he will have his crews out there. They'll do the work that Benton County has approved to connect the existing temporary storm ditch on the east side of 16th Street underneath Chapel Drive to the rest of the storm system, Benton County storm system on the south side of Chapel Drive. Once that stormwater connection is complete, then there will be no need for the ditch on the north side of the Timothy houses. So he will be filling that in. And the new news there is he has agreed with those homeowners on Timothy that he's going to pay for half of the cost of a retaining wall along the backside of that sidewalk so that they got a less steep backyard. It'll be a little more level backyard for them. It's going to be, I think, 3 to 4 foot in height all along the backside of that sidewalk. In addition to filling in that ditch and bringing in some additional soil to kind of bring those backyards up a little bit more level. So again, nice progress as far as getting agreements with the neighbors. I do still hear from neighbors on Timothy and give them updates. The plan, for a long time, we were waiting for a plan from the engineer for the new storm system. We've got that. We've got it approved. He's got it mostly built. We were waiting on weather, and now we're waiting on additional funds to complete that project. Any questions on the ditch behind the homes on North Timothy, or the north side of Timothy Street?
Councilor Bisco.
Well, this I think is one of those areas that we've heard from some of the property owners about the water that is in that ditch. Do you have an idea of how deep that water has been? Obviously, it would be less now than it was over the winter season.
In the winter, Yeah, I honestly can't tell you, Councilor Bisco. I wish I could. I don't want to make up a number. I've seen it with water in it. I've seen it without water in it, but I've never put a measuring table to it. I mean, it's not 8 feet deep. It's not 3 inches deep. But I don't want to judge. I mean, it's 2 to 3 feet deep, I would gather, if I had to guess. But yeah, right now it's all but dry.
And this has been fenced, is that correct? This particular section
Has been what?
fenced? I think that was one of the asks was that this piece get fenced because there were kids, in particular, some of the property owners in that section. They were concerned about the access to the water for the kids.
Yes, there's the orange construction fencing all along the backside of the sidewalk, the whole length of Willow Drive, which is the backside of Timothy.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more. So sounds like it was stormwater. Would this have normally been something that was done before the homes were built as part of like that infrastructure that we would normally put in place?
Typically stormwater is done, yeah, along with water and sewer lines. All of that is typically done. This one was a little different because it was part of phase 2. Was when the stormwater was the replacement of this storm system was going to be done. This is the 2 30-inch lines that were approved to go under the street of 16th Street. This is the one that Mr. Miller stated that he made the financial decision to not install under 16th Street and to punt that to the next phase, which would have been over to 17th Street. He did that on his own accord to save money on the project. And I believe that his words is that he regrets that decision now where he's trying to remedy it.
Thank you. Did you, Councilor Andrade?
You said that he made that decision of his own accord. Doesn't that have to get like approved by the planning commission? Like it as part of the application to build the development in the first place?
Yeah, his approval included plans for, well, the approval that the planning commission makes is that he's going to put all the infrastructure in place. The specifics of that come later. There's an engineering meeting between his engineer and the city's engineer, and they determine water lines, sewer lines, storm lines, street, etc. Locations, depths, sizes, all of that gets ironed out by the engineers, not necessarily by the planning commission. The plan was for 2 30-inch pipes to go down 16th Street, and he chose to not put those on 16th Street. He paved the street, and then he moved on with future phases, and then kind of hit the wall where he couldn't do more development. And so now he, rather than dig up, I mean, his option could still be to dig up 16th Street, put 2 30-inch pipes in there. But obviously that's a much more expensive fix than what he's looking at doing, which was submitting a secondary set of pipes, which would go east of the houses on the east side of 16th Street when they go in. Essentially where the open ditch is now is where those 2 pipes are going to go in the future. But that's a phase 2B solution.
So then is that how it's normally done though? Or is this just kind of like an anomalous decision? I'm just trying to, it doesn't, I don't know, but I would think that typically that would need to be in place beforehand. And I guess I'm just trying to figure out why, assuming that that is something that is a regular occurrence of like you have all of these lines put in place before moving on to the next phase. I'm just trying to figure out like where that misstep could have been prevented for future projects.
So the remedy the city has is we could have not allowed any of the home purchasers on 16th Street to buy their homes until all of the infrastructure is in place and approved by the city. That would mean nobody would be living on any of those new houses on 16th Street or would have been living in there for the last year and a half. We didn't feel like that was fair to the homeowners and the home buyers. And there was adequate storm system in place still at the time, still functioning, albeit it was an open ditch back behind the backside of Timothy Homes. But yeah, that was a decision that the city made to allow for people to not lose their houses because of a lack of a replacement storm system.
Okay, because that seems like something that we should definitely not let happen again. Like, I understand it's important for people to live in houses, but also they've been waiting for how long for this? Like, it just, I don't know. It seems like a bigger question to deliberate before allowing the project to proceed. My opinion, of course.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I'll just say, I guess, generally speaking, we're handling the development of Millpond Crossing Phase 3 much differently than we did Phase 1 or Phase 2. So not to say necessarily we've learned from our mistakes, but we're definitely ensuring that Mr. Miller and the Millpond Crossing development is fully developed with all infrastructure on Phase 3 before any houses get sold there. And that's the way that Mr. Miller wants to do it. That's the way the city is going to require that it be done. I mentioned in the past, when it comes to housing, during a housing shortage and a housing crisis, we got both the city and a developer that were looking to help people get into houses. And that was at the expense of, future development taking place. And I just think it got overwhelmed between the infrastructure costs, the home costs, and then the mitigation for all of the wetland stuff, all of the methane mitigation, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, just got to be too much last year. It's easy to look back. I guess the caution is it's easy to look back from a year or two ago and decisions that were made and second guess, but the reality was at the time, we felt like we were making good and sound decisions. We see repercussions of those now, and so we're not repeating those things in the future.
Yeah, I guess the main thing is just, I know we've talked about this many times before, and not just with regards to Millpond, but just the notion of we need policies in order to prevent these sticking to policies is going to help prevent any of these kinds of issues from happening in the future. And I guess just trying to understand how we can do that moving forward. So thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Nielsen.
Is there any way to secure that when Mr. Miller pays his application fees, that he will also conjointly also pay the Benton County permit, so that that ditch, open ditch on Timothy Street, can be done at the same time, or recent, so it doesn't another delayed again for more loans? I just worry that this is a process of many loans.
Yeah, I believe he's got everything he needs to do the construction. He's got the approval from the city engineer and the county engineer for the stormwater. So he's got every incentive to get that done, and he's really got no incentive to not get it done.
Okay.
He can't proceed with Phase 3 until all of the infrastructure for Phase 2 is in place and working. That's Phase 2 and Phase 2B. So he has every incentive to get that done, and really no incentive to not get it done.
Thank you.
Councilor Biscoe.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question goes back a little bit to what Councilor Lehman said, and that's, interest rates, also the unanticipated costs of mitigation, which we're not talking about a lot here, but if we're looking at the DEQ documents, it's sizable, and certainly it's impacted this project. In the event, do we have a bond with Miller, with Levi Miller, in order to ensure that this infrastructure occurs?
We do, yeah. We require a performance bond with all of our developers. So in the event that they fail or they fold or they file for bankruptcy, then we can go after that bond and complete the infrastructure.
So I know we require it, but I don't know that we had it, for example, with Heather Glen. Do we actually have one secured with this development?
We do.
Okay. And then my,
And we had a performance bond with Heather Glenn as well.
Thank you. And Chris, do you want to hit up the next 3 bullet points?
Sure. Oops, sorry, I hit my phone. Number 3, no trespass signs, fences were added, as was talked about earlier, both behind, along the back of the sidewalk down Willow. The orange construction fence was installed, and then along the east side of 16th Street, construction fencing and no trespassing where signs were installed. We heard from several neighbors that there were concerns. I think we heard from the city council, a council meeting last month or month before. I reached out to Mr. Miller, said that, hey, you said this was going to get done. It hadn't got done. I think within 2 days later, he had the signs and the fencing up. So appreciate him being responsive there on getting that done. That's temporary fencing. The intent is that when his crews are there working, coming in and out, that fencing is going to have to come down so they can get to the houses and get the houses built. But for now, hopefully that's keeping some of the neighborhood kids off of the property and preventing them from trespassing. Any questions on the temporary fence or signs?
Councilor Bisco.
I've actually been out to that fence was a concern that has been shared with some property owners out there. That fence is by no means what I would consider construction fencing. We used to call it snow fencing, but it's not something that stays upright well. I could walk over it probably 75 to 100 foot long, could literally step right over it. And in the street area where that is at, which is between 2 of the swales or kind of where these ditches are, they're literally driving over this fence. So it's the orange kind of snow fence. Sometimes it's that dark green, but it's for all practical purposes laying down and certainly is not a prevention from any kids that want to get into that space. Just as a matter of, the comment to the no trespassing signs, kids that can't read no trespassing aren't going to care when they can just walk right over the fence and get into that construction site and where that water is standing or has been standing. It might not be today, but it's important, it seems like, that either we require that to be a actual construction fence, as in chain link type fencing, what you typically see around construction, or some sort of insurance that kids can't just freely walk in and out of that space. And even when it's upright, it's only, I don't know if it's even quite 4 feet long. Any kid with any intent is just going to go right over it. It's just that soft, flexible fencing. So is there something we can do that is more in line with construction fencing that would ensure that kids can't get into that space?
I don't believe so. I don't believe that our code allows us to require him to put fencing up around the residential development the way that it's built. We can look at that a little bit closer, but I don't know. Not to be too flippant about it, but when I was 12, 13 years old, there wasn't a 6 foot or an 8 foot fence that I couldn't get over if I wanted to. And so, and if I was young enough to not be able to read a no trespassing sign, then hopefully my parents were on top of me and not let me go across the street and into construction zones. So I do think there's a little bit of onus here on the neighborhood and on the parents to make sure that kids aren't going over in an area. I think Mr. Levi has shown good faith effort to make it very clear that people aren't welcome on that property and that it's a construction zone. Orange fencing 2 feet off the ground or 4 feet off the ground makes it pretty clear that it's not an area that people are supposed to enter into. So I think he's done a good effort in keeping people away and giving people notice, and I'd have a hard time pushing him to do much more than what he's done.
I also note it's 9:15 and I'd really like to close this conversation up relatively soon. So just making note of that. And I know that Matt Lehman is in Florida, which is 3 hours before us. So Matt, thanks for pulling this through. But I see that Councilor Bisco has her hand up again.
I appreciate that it's the time that it is, but it feels like this is a long time coming update. So thank you also, Chris, for providing this. The community has expressed clearly their concerns, and we're seeing evidence of that in the newspaper as well. I am disappointed, Chris, that you think it's okay that we want to disregard safety. And I don't think that Levi has exhibited good faith efforts in protecting the community or their children from these construction sites. I walked out there and there's construction materials everywhere. There is steel rods laying all over, there are stacks of stuff, and quite frankly, at least the Timothy ditch we know has been accessible and available to kids for many, many months now. So I'm disappointed that we think it's okay to just, as you said, flippantly, not to be too flippant. I do think it was less than respectful to the folks that have been enduring some of the things that have gone out there. I'd like to see something done about the safety of this area and that fencing.
Yeah, I'll just speak to this one, then I'm hearing from the mayor, we need to move on. The ditch on Timothy Street, the backside Timothy is built to city standard. That is city standard for open ditches within city limits. So it's no more dangerous than any other ditch that we would allow anywhere else in the city, anywhere which we would not require a fence to go up for anything. It's city standard for an open ditch along any side street of any street in the city of Philomath. So to say that it's any more dangerous or less dangerous from another open ditch just isn't a fair and accurate statement. But again, just moving on, we'll just have to agree to disagree there, Councillor Bisco. I understand the sentiment, and I hear you. Just don't disagree, or I just don't agree. So sorry for that. The dirt pile removal, developers reached out to DEQ, several property owners. In fact, I've heard from 2 property owners now. It sounds like he's got that have agreed to take the fill dirt. That does have to be overseen by DEQ because of the dirt itself. So there's some screening that goes on and some other processes that have to happen before that can happen. But I thought it was important for the council to know that the dirt piles will start getting moved and that DEQ is overseeing that process. So it's not just going someplace that nobody's ever going to know that it ended up going. DEQ is overseeing that process. Councilor Andrade, you had a comment?
To clarify, so this is just the piles that are sitting out there. It doesn't have anything to do with the quote unquote dirt that is found in the yards of the property owners.
This is going to be the piles that are there and everything east of 16th Street, all which is going to be scraped. Yeah.
Okay. So existing yard dirt isn't in this agreement at all.
Let me get to that on this next bullet point. Let me touch on that real quick.
Okay.
So DEQ's revised consent order, actually just got a text from the developer today. He has signed a new revised consent order. He's awaiting DEQ signature on it, but it sounds like there's been a meeting of the minds even since I've written this up, which was last week. He feels good about the consent order. Roughly, it indicates that everything east of 16th Street and all of that fill material, that organic material, is going to be removed, taken off site, screened, taken off site. New fill material is going to be brought in. Everything west of 16th Street, I don't know the details. I've not read this plan, but in short, they'll be reaching out to homeowners and they'll be installing some type of a venting system in the ground in those backyard areas. It'll do some trenching, installing some pipe. Again, I don't want to get into the details because I don't know the details, but in summary, I was told that they would be handled differently, less intrusively than everything kind of east of 16th Street. So most important thing is there is an updated, agreed upon, revised consent order between DEQ and Millpond Crossing. I hope to get a copy of that as soon as DEQ signs it. In fact, I've requested that they send me a copy of it, just so I'm in the loop on those provisions and making sure that we're looking at those provisions when we're doing future approvals of land use decisions, site plans, all that kind of stuff. So good news there. That's been months in the making. And frankly, it's taken reaching out to legislators and DEQ themselves and attorneys to get this agreement in place. So it was no easy feat. So I'm just glad that that is in place and DEQ is on board with the plans that Millpond Crossing's consultant has proposed for mitigating. But then lastly, the future park. The design of this went through just a local neighborhood committee that had been meeting together. Representative of that committee met with the park advisory board. Chelsea actually oversaw a, what do we call it? Like a work group. It wasn't a work group. It was a like an open house of some sort.
Yeah.
Chelsea? all that.
Oh, sorry, I just moved. Yeah, we hosted an open house for the community to come, several neighborhood members who had met previously to discuss what they wanted came and had public input on features of the park.
So the Park Advisory Board's reviewed that. It's going back for kind of final design and will come forward again. Park Advisory Board will review that, make a recommendation to the City Council. We do want the City Council to sign off on that park before it's accepted. So that'll come from a recommendation from the Park Board. But again, that's a phase 3 project. And right now our primary focus is on phase 2 and 2B and the infrastructure that needs to get in place to support those 2 phases. I do want to be clear, phase 2 is essentially everything on the west side of 16th Street. Phase 2B is the new homes that are going to go in on the east side of 16th Street. And so there's been some confusion there with homeowners and the others. You will see development going on the east side of 16th Street. He's got to get all that work done because that includes new sewer taps, new water taps. All that work has to be done, and he's got to cut into this existing street to do that, repave, and then he can submit the street, the water lines, the sewer lines, all that has to get submitted to the city and approved by the city before we accept it. That needs to be done for that phase. So, the city can't accept 16th Street until all of that phase 2B work gets done. So I don't want people to be surprised when there's new houses going up on the east side of 16th Street. That's 2B, and what the Planning Commission approved was that no future development could take place in phase 3 until phase 2 and 2B infrastructure was completed and the city had signed off on everything.
Thank you. And Councilor Biscoe, you had your hand up.
I did. Just a clarifying question. So the city can't accept 16th Street. What does that mean?
Any new street that's constructed by a private developer has to be inspected and approved by the city before it's considered a publicly owned city street. That has not happened for 16th Street yet.
Okay. And my other question really was, there's not an update here on the methane situation that's going on out there. My understanding is, and I think it's important that we acknowledge it here, is that the meters that are out there have not been they've not been monitored since February because the developer has not paid for that service to continue, and that DEQ would need that information in order to come up with a full and complete mitigation and recommendation plan. I also think it's important that we recognize that it's a pretty, what I would consider urgent for those property owners, I guess, is that I believe it's called the explosive limit for methane gas in a scenario like this is approximately 5%. And we are seeing readings in people's backyards, right off of their patios, their cement, slabs, their sliding doors in their kitchens. The highest reading is over 50% out there. And so that is considerably higher. And yet we do not have updated survey information. DEQ is hoping to get seasonal and longer range information so that they can make sufficient recommendations. I'm concerned that we're not talking about that here. So do we have a plan on what that looks like? My also understanding is they have been advised not to smoke light barbecues, run power tools, run lawnmowers, of course, fireworks and open flames in any of that development. And certainly that impacts those families as well.
Yeah, so that notice came out from DEQ about 3 years ago. I'm curious who your source at DEQ is about the readings information, because that's not information I have.
So that is the information from the DEQ site and also from some of the reports from DEQ. So it's in the information that I shared with the council via link. DEQ keeps that updated, not immediately updated, but at the time that we were originally looking at, and that is a direct report from some of the property owners out there as well. It's very accessible information. The project manager has it, as well as DEQ headquarters, and certainly the property owners who have those meters on their property are aware of these numbers as well.
Yeah, I guess my question is the timeliness of that. I mean, I'm looking for the revised consent order. That's going to have all those details in there, Councilor Biscoe, and I've not seen that yet. So Obviously DEQ is not going to agree to a revised consent order that they don't agree with. So I'm looking for more information. I don't have information about that you're sharing about the most recent meter readings or any of that. So
could you come back with a report to the council then on that information once you've seen that consent order, or will you be sharing that with the council?
I can. I think it's going to be pretty technical, but I'd be happy to share it. Or I can send a link to it. It'll be on DEQ's website.
Thank you.
Sure.
And we got 5 minutes left. Councilor Andrade.
Yeah, I just wanted to verify. So the reason why houses are still being built in phase 2B is because there are things that need to be, certain infrastructure that needs to be built before the city can accept 16th Street. Is that correct?
Yes.
So why is
that's
it?
not necessarily the reason they're being built. That's one of the consequences of them still being built. I don't know that's the reason.
I guess I'm having trouble understanding why the houses get to be built. Why not have infrastructure built first, accept the street, and then move on to the houses? Because it's only going to take longer to build the infrastructure and the houses than it more or less the people who live here have been waiting for such a long time. And to me, I would think that it would make more sense to build the infrastructure first and accept the street. And that would help alleviate some of those problems sooner and then get to the houses, as opposed to, because building houses is going to take even more time. Like, I doubt they'll be able to finish them, both projects simultaneously. Can you clear this up for me, please?
Yeah, the infrastructure project I think you referred to, that's about a 4-day project, a 3 or 4 day project. So once he's got the funding to do the stormwater, that's the only infrastructure that's needed still for phase 2, is that storm connection. And from what I've been told, that's about a 3, maybe a 5-day project at most. So again, he's got every incentive to get that done sooner than later. I think we've seen good intent moving forward on this. And so I mean, we can say no future building until that infrastructure's done, but you're talking a matter of a couple of days at most, probably. So
then I guess can you clarify then, I must have conflated them, what the difference is between 2 and 2B. I thought 2B was the one where the infrastructure needed to be in place.
So I guess when I say infrastructure, I'm thinking of like main water lines and main sewer lines. Those are already there. Those run down 16th Street already. What he needs to do, and the street itself, the asphalt on 16th Street is there. Yes. What I said is the original design for 16th Street had houses parallel to 16th Street. The new design has them perpendicular to it. And so you've got several more lots, a greater number of lots that are now adjacent to 16th Street. And so he needs to do new water taps and sewer taps, which means he's got to go out into that street. He's got to cut into the existing asphalt, make the new water connection, make the new sewer connection, repave the street. That all needs to be done. That's not what we would necessarily consider part of the public works infrastructure that the city's approving. That's all owner side. It's owned by the homeowner. It's not owned by the city. So the only infrastructure, the only city infrastructure that the developer is building is the storm project. And that's just a matter of connecting it to the south side of Chapel Drive and then filling in the ditch on the north side of Timothy.
So there's no order to it. So he's allowed to do 2B before 2. And then once both of those are done, excuse me?
I think they're gonna happen at the same time, Councilor Andrade.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I also had a question about the park.
Councilor Andrade,
Yeah, I had a
I'm gonna
question
take-
about the park.
I understand that, but we're gonna have a vote from the council on whether or not to adjourn the meeting. That's just the fair thing to do. Wake up, Mr. Councilman Lehman. Wake up.
Sorry.
I
But
will note I just have one more question
I'm gonna
in
make a
case that's
motion.
helpful.
I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn the meeting. If I have a second. So we have a motion made by myself and seconded by Councilor Kazi. All in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. All opposed, please raise your hand and say nay. So motion carries 5-2.
That's
Have a wonderful
disappointing.
evening all. Thank you.